February 4th, 2016 remains the infamous day when one of the biggest bank cyber heists in the world began rolling into motion. This attack cost the Bangladesh government up to $81 million, but they were lucky because the ruthless hackers had their eyes on over $1 billion. An attack of a magnitude the world had not seen before, carried out by professionals who were highly skilled at covering their tracks. This heist was one to remember. We covered how it went down, the investigation, and all the other dramatic elements involved in this exciting heist in this video. $81 million was stolen in one day, but for how long had these thieves been planning one of the world's most daring heists? The attackers may have begun planning the February 2016 heist in October of 2014, when, according to FireEye, the North Korean hackers first began conducting online research on banks in Bangladesh. In order to carry out this massive heist, the attackers paid close attention to how money moved and picked the system with the most vulnerabilities that they could exploit. The money that was stolen wasn't actually in the Bangladesh bank. Instead, it was in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York is one of the most secure financial institutions in the world. The bank is most popular for its secure gold vaults, but it is also responsible for storing the reserve wealth of many countries. Some 250 foreign central banks and governments keep $3.3 trillion of their assets at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, about half of the world's official dollar reserves. However, it didn't turn out well for Bangladesh in February 2016 when its foreign reserves were looted by skilled hackers. The big hack took place at the Bangladesh Central Bank because it is the country's central bank, and it is the only source that can send messages to the Federal Reserve of New York to transfer money from its account to another. Due to the hackers' ability to clean up their trail nicely, it is hard to say specifically where the attack started. However, based on how it was carried out, experts have suggested that the hackers got into the bank's system through malware that they installed through email links or malicious websites. Once they were inside, they got the bank's SWIFT information, and that was all they needed to start one of the biggest bank heists in history. They had spent many months planning this attack on paper, but will they be able to see it through to the end? February 4th, 2016 was a perfect date for the heist. In Muslim Bangladesh, the weekend starts on Thursday. The next Monday was the Chinese New Year, which meant the banks in the Philippines were to enjoy a 3-day weekend. Furthermore, the time zone difference between Bangladesh and New York also provided another advantage because even though it was a Bangladesh weekend, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York was still actively receiving their transfer requests. Once the time was perfect, and the hackers had acquired the access details they required through their hack from earlier on, they were ready to go. On February 4th, unknown hackers used the SWIFT credentials of Bangladesh Central Bank employees to send more than 36 fraudulent money transfer requests to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, asking the bank to transfer millions of the Bangladesh bank's funds to bank accounts in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and other parts of Asia. With the SWIFT credentials in their hands, the hackers had so much money to steal. How did they end up with just $81 million? Ordinarily, when the Bangladesh bank sends such requests to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to transfer some money from their bank to another foreign account through SWIFT, the Reserve Bank is meant to process the transaction immediately. If things went as smoothly as this, the heist would have been many times more catastrophic than it turned out to be. The 35 requests were supposed to transfer almost $1 billion from Bangladesh Bank's account with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The US bank blocked the majority of those, but not before 5 transactions worth a combined $101 million were processed. Out of the hundreds of banks in Manila that were available, the hackers chose to use the one Jupiter Street to receive their stolen funds, and this cost them many hundreds of millions of dollars. The name Jupiter caused the transactions to be flagged and led to further investigations on the requests. It was flagged because Jupiter was also the name of an oil tanker and a shipping company under United States sanctions against Iran. Even though the transactions were actually unrelated to the Iranian shipping company, further investigations revealed the irregularities in the transactions that the hackers failed to cover. This small coincidence uncovered the plot and led the US bank to stop processing the Bangladesh requests. However, by the time the fraud was discovered, the New York branch of the US Central Bank had approved 5 of the payments. The coincidence with Jupiter was not the final undoing of the hackers, because even though most of their requests had been flagged and stopped, the 5 requests that had been processed were bringing in $101 million through different banks. The $101 million was supposed to be processed to different accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. Out of the entire amount, $20 million was a donation to a Sri Lankan charity organization called Shalika Foundation. Once again, this transaction would have been processed seamlessly, but for one small error. The hacker who prepared the request did not spell foundation correctly, and once again, it raised concerns. The transfer was made to the Shalika Foundation. An eagle-eyed bank employee spotted the spelling mistake and the transaction was reversed. Even though the hackers wanted to steal about $1 billion, $81 million is still a lot of money to move around. How did they manage to move so much money without getting busted? The 35 SWIFT requests that the hackers made were meant to send up to $951 million out of Bangladesh's reserve account, but thanks to some mistakes, the hackers could only process $81 million. Even though the amount is small compared to what the hackers actually wanted to steal, for Bangladesh, a country where 1 in 5 people live below the poverty line, they were ready to go to the farthest ends to ensure they recovered every last dollar. This means the thieves had to use a very sophisticated escape plan to get away from the wrath of the law. That weekend, one of the bank's directors, Jubair bin Huda, was on duty, and he came in to check that everything was going fine. Ideally, the SWIFT messages should have let him know that somebody was sending fraudulent requests to their reserve bank remotely, but the hackers had covered that. The transactions that should ordinarily have printed automatically were not printed, and when he tried to print it manually, the printer failed. The hackers had infected the system with malware that disabled the printer, and Bangladesh bank officials did not see the Fed's query and knew nothing of the fraudulent transactions. The director thought the printer had a fault, but since it was a Friday, the other officials were not around to fix the printer for him, so the problem had to wait until Saturday. This meant that the Bangladesh officials could not see how they were about to be robbed blind. In the meantime, as the US Reserve Bank flagged transfers worth about $800 million from their end, they sent SWIFT messages to the Bangladesh bank, but of course, they could not see it. The Bangladesh officials were initially blind to the fact that their nation's reserves were being robbed. But when they realized, why couldn't they stop the transfers and get their money back? The crime group had created fraudulent accounts in the RCBC, Rizal Commercial Banking Corp, branch on Jupiter Street in the Philippines, where they were going to receive the money. Before the US bank noticed the error, they had already processed payments of $6 million, $20 million, $25 million, and $30 million to the Philippines bank. While the US feds and the Bangladesh officials were still trying to communicate what was going on amongst themselves, the money was transferred between accounts, sent to a currency exchange firm, swapped into local currency, and redeposited at the bank. After a hard weekend of following the money trail, on Monday, the Bangladesh bank sent multiple SWIFT messages to the RCBC bank, telling them to block the accounts. However, that Monday was a part of the long weekend because of the Chinese New Year holiday. When the bank resumed, they continued processing the transactions across those fraudulent accounts till they eventually blocked them. By the time they responded and blocked the accounts, there was only $68,305 left. The bank's excuse for not promptly blocking the transactions was that the SWIFT messages from Bangladesh Bank had been wrongly formatted and were not marked as urgent, so they had gone into a large pile of unread messages for almost the whole day. Once the money is moving in the banking system, there is a clear trace that the authorities can follow. So how did the thieves manage to make the stolen $81 million legitimate? With so many authorities tightly following the money trail, the money needed to be washed clean, and Philippines casinos were the perfect place for this. In 2023, Philippines casinos lobbied to have their gambling houses excluded from the strict anti-money laundering laws, and their wish was granted. Today, Philippine casinos have been specifically exempt from the national AML regime. Officials say the decision was made to avoid hindering the development of the gaming industry. This gap in Philippine laws turned out to be Bangladesh's worst nightmare because the hackers knew enough to use these casinos to launder their money. Out of the $81 million that was stolen, $50 million was thrown into the Philippines casino industry. The thieves will take private rooms and play baccarat to make the money come out as legitimate earnings from the casino. For weeks, the gamblers sat inside Manila's casinos, washing the money. Only $50 million of the stolen money was deposited into the casinos, and some sources claim that there was a delivery of a total of $30,639,141.63 to Wei Kang-su, a Chinese national, through cash deliveries at the Soler Casino. A developing country like Bangladesh will do anything to recover their $81 million from the hackers, but do they even know who carried out the attack? Bangladesh Bank entrusted World Informatrix Cybersecurity (WICS) with the investigation mandate for the heist, providing incident response, remediation, and strategic direction. The external investigation revealed to the Bangladesh officials that they had been breached through an attack from outside of Bangladesh. They discovered that the malware had been in their systems from January 2016, and it had monitored how they went about their operations for making international transfers. Further investigations also revealed similarities between this attack and the unsolved theft of $250,000 at Sonali Bank involving fraudulent transfer requests sent over the SWIFT International Payments Network. While the Bangladesh investigations helped officials better understand what went down, it did not bring them any closer to finding the culprits. In the Philippines, there was more success in arresting people for their involvement in the heist and recovering some of the stolen money. For instance, Maya de Guito was the manager of the RCBC branch where the money was transferred to and converted to pesos. She was sentenced to 4 to 7 years in prison for each of the 8 counts of money laundering by the Makati Regional Trial Court. Over a year after she was indicted by state prosecutors, she was fined a total of $109 million. In the United States, some authorities believe that this attack was one of the cyber attacks carried out by the Lazarus Group, which is allegedly funded by North Korea. Lazarus Group has been linked to different cyber attacks around the world, like the Sony Pictures Entertainment hack and many similar attacks on South Korea in 2017. It was reported that US prosecutors were building potential cases that would accuse North Korea of directing the theft of $81 million from Bangladesh Bank's account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Almost a decade after the bank heists, shouldn't the world have been able to rally round to catch the thieves and return Bangladesh's precious reserves? Since this huge heist was completed, the Bangladesh government has failed to recover most of its money from the thieves. It has sued multiple involved parties to recover the stolen money, but only very little has been recovered. It seems that the experienced hackers managed to make Bangladesh's taxpayers' money vanish into thin air in one of the world's most elaborate bank cyber heists.